The warmth of another body was a cocoon around me, a silent shield against the lingering chill of the argument that had just ripped through the apartment. Fingers, impossibly gentle, threaded through my hair at the nape of my neck, the repetitive motion slowly unknotting the tension coiled there. The tremors that had shaken my frame began to subside, soothed by the slow, steady rhythm of a heartbeat against my back and the soft puff of breath against my shoulder. I kept my eyes closed, not yet ready to face the wreckage, choosing instead to anchor myself to this unexpected calm, this quiet harbor after a devastating storm. A scent filled my senses, and it was the first thing that felt truly wrong. It was not the acrid scent of stale tobacco and the sharp, pine-like bite of the cologne he wore like armor. Instead, a complex, warm fragrance of sandalwood and something floral, like jasmine blooming in the dark, enveloped me. It was a clean, intimate smell, something that belonged to silk and soft light, not to the harsh words and slammed doors that defined the last few hours. My mind, sluggish with exhaustion, registered the dissonance, but was too tired to process it, simply accepting the fragrance as part of this strange, comforting dream. The hands that held me were wrong, too. I was accustomed to a possessive grip, to calloused certainty that mapped my body as its territory. These hands were different. They were slender, with long fingers that moved over my back with a delicate, almost reverent pressure. There was no ownership in their touch, only an offering of comfort, a question rather than a claim. The arms wrapped around my waist were slight but firm, holding me together without crushing me, a stark contrast to the bruising embraces I had grown to anticipate as a form of apology. My mind was too weary to parse the inconsistencies. The storm of the argument had hollowed me out, leaving behind a raw, aching void. This gentle presence, whatever its source, was filling that void with a quiet warmth I desperately needed. I surrendered to it completely, letting my head rest heavily against a shoulder that felt too slight, too delicate to be his. I simply allowed myself to drift in the quiet aftermath, clinging to this solace like a castaway clings to driftwood, not questioning the miracle that had brought it to me in the middle of the raging sea. Slowly, as if swimming up from a great depth, consciousness began to return in sharp, unwelcome fragments. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, glued shut by dried tears. A dim, ambient light filtered through them, suggesting a single lamp was lit across the room, casting long, soft shadows. The sounds of the city outside were muted and indistinct, a low hum that only amplified the profound silence within the apartment. I felt myself being watched, not with judgment or anger, but with a patient, unwavering tenderness that made my skin prickle. The face hovering above me came into focus in pieces, a mosaic of features my exhausted brain struggled to assemble. I saw the perfectly defined curve of a lip, the unblemished expanse of smooth, dark skin across a high cheekbone. My gaze drifted up to large, dark eyes, deep and luminous in the low light, reflecting a profound sympathy and something else, something I could not name. They were not the eyes I expected to see, not the eyes narrowed by anger or clouded with begrudging regret. These eyes held a universe of understanding. And then, with a jolt that felt both physical and electric, my mind supplied the name, connecting the features with a certainty that stole my breath. It was not him. The face was not the weathered, familiar landscape of my husband's. The soft lips, the gentle eyes, the delicate scent of jasmine and sandalwood. They belonged to Alara, the wife of my husband's best friend, the woman whose hand I had politely shaken at dinner parties, whose quiet grace I had always admired from a safe, respectable distance. My body went rigid in her arms, the dream of comfort shattering into a million shards of sharp, cold reality. She must have felt the shift, the sudden tension in my muscles, but her grip did not loosen. She simply continued to hold me, her fingers still resting gently at the base of my neck. The quiet harbor had become a treacherous, uncharted territory, and I was utterly lost. The gentle pressure of her lips against my temple, a gesture of pure solace moments before, now felt like a brand, searing a question into my skin that I had no way to answer. The first thing I registered was the light. It was not the gentle, diffuse glow of dawn, but a series of sharp, interrogating stripes cutting through the blinds, laying bare the dust motes dancing in the sterile air. Then came the cold. It was a profound and chilling emptiness in the space beside me, a void where warmth had been just hours before. My hand instinctively reached across the sheets, the fabric cool and undisturbed, confirming the silent message my body already knew. She was gone. The ghost of a fragrance lingered on my pillow, a phantom presence more real than the empty space. It was the warm, woody note of sandalwood, intricately woven with the sweet, heady scent of jasmine. I breathed it in deeply, a stark contrast to the familiar, almost abrasive scent of my husband that had long ago permeated every fabric in this room. My skin still held the memory of her touch, a tingling awareness along my spine and the back of my neck where her fingers had traced patterns of comfort. It was an echo of a sensation so new, so foreign, that my body was still trying to learn its language. The air in the apartment felt stagnant, heavy with the unspoken residue of last night's fight. Every object seemed to sit in quiet judgment, the overturned magazine on the floor, the two glasses left on the coffee table, one of them his, the other mine. The silence was no longer the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home, but an accusatory, ringing void. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene, and I was both the victim and the sole guilty witness to an act I couldn't yet define. The familiar landscape of my home had become an alien territory overnight. Guilt arrived first, a sharp and dutiful soldier reporting for duty. It settled as a physical weight in my chest, a shard of glass lodged beneath my sternum with every breath. Years of shared history, of vows made under a summer sky, of a life built brick by painstaking brick, all rose up to condemn me. The betrayal was not just of him, but of the woman I was supposed to be, the wife who endured the storms and waited for the calm. That woman would never have woken up to the scent of another on her pillow. But beneath the guilt, something else stirred, a slow, intoxicating warmth that spread through my veins. It was the startling, powerful feeling of being seen. For years, I had felt like a fixture in my own life, a piece of familiar furniture he navigated around but no longer truly noticed. Her gaze, her touch, had been different. It was as if she had looked at a landscape he had long since taken for granted and had seen the subtle colors of the sunset, felt the texture of the stones, and heard the whisper of the wind through the grass. I forced myself out of bed and into the bathroom, avoiding my own reflection until the last possible moment. When I finally looked up, the woman in the mirror was a stranger. The familiar lines of fatigue were etched around her eyes, perhaps a little deeper than yesterday. Her hair was a mess and her skin was pale in the harsh morning light. But there was something else, something new in the dark depths of her pupils. It was not a fire, but an ember, a single point of light glowing with a quiet, dangerous intensity. I touched my own lips, the skin still feeling sensitive, almost bruised. The memory of her kiss was vivid, not a passionate, demanding kiss, but something slower, more deliberate, an act of discovery. It was an exploration, a question my body had answered without my mind's consent. Seeing my own reflection, I could no longer deny the reality of it. The ember in my eyes flickered, a mixture of shame and a terrifying, exhilarating pulse of desire. This was real. It had happened. Moving through the apartment was like navigating a museum of a life that was no longer entirely mine. There was his chair, the indentation in the cushion a perfect mold of his body. There was the half-empty mug of coffee he had abandoned during the argument. These were monuments to a shared history that now felt like it belonged to someone else. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a chasm that had opened up in the middle of our living room, and I had no idea how to cross it. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a vivid, detailed hallucination born from the emotional exhaustion of the fight, my mind conjuring a comforting presence to get me through the night. It was a plausible, rational explanation that would allow me to put the pieces of my life back together. But the logic was hollow, a fragile defense against an undeniable truth. Dreams do not leave behind the scent of jasmine on your skin. I walked back to the bed and buried my face in the pillow beside mine, the one where her head had rested. The fragrance was stronger there, an irrefutable piece of evidence. This was not a dream. This was a choice I had made, or a choice that had been made for me, in a moment of profound weakness and desperate need. The knowledge was terrifying, but it was also strangely grounding. It was a secret that was mine alone, a single, vibrant point of color in a life that had become muted and gray. The silence that had felt so oppressive just moments before now seemed different. It was the same silence I had lived with for years, the quiet spaces during dinner, the unspoken words in the car, the vast emptiness in our bed even when he was lying next to me. The sharp, clean pain of this new guilt felt alive, electric. It was a stark contrast to the dull, chronic ache of being lonely within a marriage. And in that moment, I knew with a dreadful certainty which pain was worse. My fingers found the cool, smooth metal of the wedding band on my left hand. For years, it had felt weightless, a part of me. This morning, it felt heavy, foreign, like a manacle I had only just become aware of. I twisted it around my finger, the familiar motion feeling alien. The coldness of the gold was a stark contrast to the memory of warm skin and the phantom scent of sandalwood that still clung to me, a promise of something I didn't yet understand but was already beginning to crave. Her studio became our sanctuary. It was a world away from the muted tones and silent tensions of my own home, a vast, light-filled space with towering ceilings and enormous windows that overlooked the city's chaotic geometry. The air here was alive with its own unique atmosphere, a heady mix of turpentine, linseed oil, and the rich, dark aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Unfinished canvases leaned against every wall, their vibrant, abstract worlds offering glimpses into her mind. And the floor was a Jackson Pollock of accidental drips and splatters, a testament to a life of creation. Here, within these four walls, we built a separate reality. We did not speak of our husbands, of our other lives that ran on parallel, predictable tracks outside. Our conversations were about art and literature, about the music that made our souls ache, about the half-forgotten ambitions we had packed away like old photographs. It was a space for the women we were before we became wives, a place where our thoughts could stretch and breathe without being confined by expectation or history. I found myself watching her, mesmerized. She moved through the studio with an unconscious grace, a dancer in her own domain. Her hands, often stained with a rainbow of pigments, were never still. They gestured as she spoke, picked up a brush to test a color, or tucked a stray pearl behind her ear. There was an intensity in her focus when she looked at a canvas, a complete and total absorption that made the rest of the world fall away. To see her in her element was to see her true self, raw and unfiltered. The moment that changed everything came quietly, without fanfare. She was showing me a new piece, a canvas dominated by deep blues and violent slashes of white, and I noticed a smudge of ultramarine on the back of her hand. Without thinking, I reached out and gently brushed it with my thumb. She froze, her breath hitched, and her dark eyes lifted to meet mine. The air between us grew thick and heavy, charged with a sudden, palpable energy that silenced the city noise and the hum of our own thoughts. She did not pull away. Instead, she slowly turned her hand over and laced her fingers through mine. The contact was electric, a current that shot straight from her skin to my core. Her grip was gentle but firm, an unspoken question and its answer all at once. Without a word, she led me away from the canvases, past the cluttered work tables, to a small alcove at the back of the studio, where an old, worn velvet sofa was hidden away like a secret. The light from a nearby window cast a golden halo around her, illuminating the fine hairs on her arms and the deep, rich color of her eyes. She did not look at me with hunger or predatory desire the way a man so often does. Her gaze was one of profound appreciation, the focused, reverent look of an artist truly seeing the form and substance of her subject for the very first time. In that moment, I did not feel wanted. I felt seen, and the distinction was breathtaking. Her fingers moved to the buttons of my blouse, her movement slow and deliberate. With each small release of fabric, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. Her eyes never left mine, holding me captive in their warm, dark depths. This was not an act of frantic passion, but a ceremony of unveiling. I was not being undressed so much as I was being unwrapped, a precious thing being brought into the light. Her lips were soft when they finally met mine, but there was an undeniable insistence behind their gentleness. This was not the comforting, platonic kiss of that first night, but a kiss of deep and intentional desire. Her hands began to explore my body, not with greed, but with the curious, knowing touch of an artist. They mapped the line of my collarbone, traced the curve of my waist, and discovered the forgotten sensitivity of the skin along my ribs, reawakening a landscape that had long lain dormant. A body I had long considered a functional aging vessel began to stir with an intensity that was both terrifying and exhilarating. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not from cold, but from the shock of sensation. I had forgotten what it was like to be touched with such reverence, to be explored with such focused, artistic curiosity. My own hands, as if with a will of their own, rose to her shoulders, gripping the soft fabric of her shirt as I surrendered to the rising tide within me. On that old velvet couch, bathed in the afternoon sun filtering through the dusty window, I let go. The world outside, with its obligations, its history, and its silent, suffocating spaces, ceased to exist. There was only the scent of paint and her perfume, the texture of the worn velvet against my skin, and the overwhelming, all-consuming sensation of her touch. It was a dissolution of self, a complete immersion in a moment that felt both sacred and profoundly transgressive. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light like tiny, silent witnesses. My body felt boneless, utterly spent, yet humming with a new and vibrant life. The silence that settled between us was not empty, but full, charged with the weight of what had just passed. The city still hummed its distant, indifferent song, but it felt a million miles away, a rumor from another world that no longer had anything to do with me. In that sun-drenched space, I felt less like a person who had committed a betrayal and more like a canvas that had been locked away in a dark room only to be discovered and brought to life with bold, brilliant color. She had not just touched my body. She had touched the core of me, the part that had been starving for light and attention. I was no longer a muted study in gray. I was a vibrant, chaotic, and utterly new creation. The party was in full swing, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and a jazz trio playing just a little too loudly in the corner. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of forced conviviality. I held a glass of wine, the cool stem a fragile anchor in the overwhelming sea of faces and voices. My husband was across the room, deep in conversation with a group of his colleagues, his laughter booming and confident. From this distance, we looked like the perfect couple, two separate but connected points in a constellation of social success. Then I saw her. She was standing with her husband, my husband's best friend, near the grand fireplace. The soft, ambient light caught the planes of her face, making her look like a Baroque portrait brought to life. She was laughing, her head tilted back slightly, a picture of effortless grace and wifely devotion. Her hand rested on his forearm, a casual, proprietary gesture that sent a sharp, unexpected pang through my chest. They looked so natural, so perfectly matched, a seamless unit of shared history and public affection. My eyes remained fixed on her, a secret surveillance in the crowded room. I watched the way she smiled, a public smile that was bright and engaging, but lacked the private, knowing curve I had come to recognize. She was performing the role of the perfect wife with an artist's precision, every gesture and expression perfectly calibrated. She was a masterpiece of social grace, and in that moment, I hated the painting and the artist who had created it. A hot, suffocating wave of jealousy rose from my gut, so potent it made me feel dizzy. It was an ugly, irrational emotion, a possessiveness I had no right to feel. She was not mine. She belonged to him, to this life of elegant parties and public smiles. The intimacy we shared in the sunlit chaos of her studio felt like a secret, fragile world that could be shattered by the mere sight of her hand on his arm. I felt a primal urge to cross the room, to pull her away, to stake a claim I could never voice. I watched as her gaze detached from her husband's and began a slow, deliberate sweep of the room. It was a casual, searching glance, but I knew what she was looking for. Our eyes met across the crowded space. It was only for a second, a fleeting, almost imperceptible connection, but it was enough. In that brief moment, the noise of the party faded, and it was just the two of us, two silent conspirators in a room full of strangers. She turned back to the person she was speaking with, but as she did, I saw her hand move. Her fingers drifted up to her collarbone, a single index finger tracing the delicate line of the bone. It was a small, almost unconscious gesture, but it was a secret signal meant only for me. It was the same path my lips had followed just hours before in the quiet of her studio. A jolt went through me, a mixture of secret thrill and a fresh, sharper wave of jealousy. She was thinking of me, but she was standing with him. The sight of her standing beside him, so perfectly in place, ignited a possessive rage that was completely foreign to me. I wanted to see a crack in her perfect facade, a sign that this performance was a strain, that she longed for the messy, paint-stained reality of our shared afternoons. Instead, all I saw was a serene and beautiful woman laughing at her husband's jokes. I felt like a ghost at the feast, haunting the edges of a life I could touch but never truly be a part of. My husband appeared at my side, his presence a sudden heavy weight. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a familiar gesture that now felt intrusive, an unwelcome claim on a body that no longer felt entirely his. He leaned in, his voice a low rumble in my ear, saying something about a colleague, a deal, a trip. His words were just noise, a meaningless drone that I couldn't process. My attention was still a taut, invisible line stretching across the room to her. Her eyes found mine again, and this time the look was different. I saw a flicker of something that mirrored my own longing, a shared, silent ache. But it was quickly masked by a shadow of guilt, a subtle closing off as she turned her body more fully toward her husband, leaning into him, creating a physical barrier between her world and mine. It was a rejection as clear as a spoken word, a reminder of the boundaries we had so recklessly crossed, and the lines we could never permanently erase. The wine in my glass suddenly tasted bitter, acidic. The laughter around me sounded harsh and mocking. The warmth of the room felt suffocating, and I was overcome with an urgent need to escape, to be somewhere I could breathe again. The beautiful, perfect image of her and her husband, a portrait of marital bliss, had become an unbearable sight. It was a stark, brutal reminder of everything I couldn't have and everything I had put at risk for a few stolen hours in a sunlit room. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a dawning, terrifying understanding of the depth of my own feelings. This was not just a physical dalliance, a temporary escape. This was something deeper, something that had taken root in the barren soil of my life and was now threatening to break through the surface with destructive force. I had not just found a lover, I had found a reflection, and seeing that reflection turned away from me and toward another was a pain I had not anticipated. The party had become a gilded cage, and I was rattling the bars. I had to get out. I placed my half-full glass on a passing waiter's tray, the clink of glass on silver sounding unnaturally loud. My husband was still talking, but I was no longer listening. My world had narrowed to a single painful point, her, standing in the firelight, belonging to someone else. And the quiet, beautiful sanctuary of her studio now felt like the most dangerous place on earth. I left without a word, slipping out of the party like a thief. The night air was a shock, cold and clean against my fleshed skin, a welcome antidote to the suffocating warmth of the room I'd just fled. I walked to my car in a daze, the sound of my own heels clicking on the pavement, the only reality in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, not from cold, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like a physical illness. My car seemed to navigate the dark, sleeping streets of its own accord, an extension of the singular, obsessive thought that had consumed me. There was no conscious decision, only a magnetic pull toward the one place that felt both like a sanctuary and the source of my agony. Each red light was an unbearable pause, each green light a release, propelling me forward on a current of jealousy and desperation. I was a moth drawn not to a gentle flame, but to a raging inferno. The light was on, a single golden square high above the street, illuminating the vast windows of her studio. It was a beacon, a confirmation, and an invitation. I parked the car haphazardly, not caring if it was straight, and walked to the heavy steel door of the building. She opened the door to her studio almost instantly, as if she had been standing right behind it, waiting. She wore a simple silk shirt, her hair was unbound, and her feet were bare. No words were exchanged. The air between us was already thick with them. I crossed the threshold and closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. This was not born of tenderness or longing, but of a raw, possessive fury. My hands came up to frame her face, my fingers digging slightly into the soft skin of her jaw, and I crashed my mouth against hers. It was a brutal, claiming kiss meant to punish and possess, to erase the taste of him, of his life, from her lips. It was an act of ownership, a desperate attempt to reclaim the territory I felt slipping away. This was not the gentle, exploratory dance of our first encounter. This was a battle. I pushed her backward, my body pressing hers against the rough plaster of the studio wall. My hands were not gentle. They tore at the silk of her shirt, the small, pearlescent buttons scattering across the floorboards like discarded teeth. I needed to see her, to feel the uninterrupted expanse of her skin beneath my hands, to brand her with my own touch in a way that would erase his. She did not yield or submit. She met my fury with her own, her hands tangling in my hair, pulling my mouth harder against hers. Her nails, short and practical, scraped down my back, leaving hot trails of sensation in their wake. It was a storm of limbs and teeth and desperate, silent need. We stumbled away from the wall, a chaotic vortex of motion, and fell, landing hard on a large, unstretched canvas that lay spread across the floor like a clean white field. The rough texture of the canvas abraded my back as we moved, the scent of gesso and drying paint filling my lungs. This was not lovemaking. It was a violent exorcism of the jealousy that had poisoned me. My mouth moved from her lips to her neck to the collarbone she had so casually traced at the party, my teeth grazing her skin, leaving a mark I prayed would be visible tomorrow. I moved with a desperate, driving rhythm, each movement an attempt to physically assert a dominance I did not feel, to overwrite his presence with the sheer force of my own. When the release came, it was not a gentle wave, but a violent, shuddering cataclysm, a storm that broke with a force that left me trembling and breathless. I collapsed against her, my forehead pressed to hers, the anger finally spent, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. We lay in the wreckage, our bodies slick with sweat and smeared with pigments from overturned jars. Streaks of scarlet and deep indigo marred our skin, as if we had bled onto the canvas, our passion a violent, beautiful wound. A profound quiet descended upon the studio, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and the distant, lonely wail of a siren. I lay sprawled on the canvas, the raw, furious energy that had propelled me now completely drained, leaving a heavy, boneless exhaustion in its wake. The cool night air felt soothing on my overheated skin. For a moment, there was a strange peace in the aftermath, a calm that follows the utter devastation of a storm. The world felt muted, distant, and nothing existed beyond the tangle of our limbs and the chaotic beauty of the paint we were smeared with. Slowly, I pushed myself up, the rough canvas scraping against my bare back. A need for normalcy, for a simple act of cleansing, propelled me to my feet. I started towards the small bathroom tucked away in the corner of the studio, my movements stiff and sore. As I passed her cluttered work table, a sliver of blue light caught my eye. It was her laptop, left open and glowing in the darkness, a small digital campfire in the vast, shadowy space. Curiosity, or perhaps some premonition, pulled me closer. The screen was active, displaying the silent, frozen grid of a video call window. But it was not frozen. The image was live. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs as I recognized the scene. It was the living room of my husband's best friend, the same room where the party had been held just hours before. The angle was low and wide, suggesting a camera placed discreetly on a bookshelf. And there they were, my husband and hers. They were sitting on the familiar leather sofa, side by side, their shoulders almost touching. They were not speaking, not drinking, not moving. Their entire beings were focused forward, their gazes fixed with a rapt, unblinking intensity. They were watching, and I knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty that defied all logic, what they were watching. They were looking at a screen of their own, a screen that was showing them us. The camera in the studio was not a security device. It was a stage light. My husband's face wore an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger, not betrayal, not even arousal in a way I could recognize. It was a look of calm, detached appraisal, the placid satisfaction of a connoisseur observing a piece of art he has commissioned. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. He was not a victim of my infidelity. He was its audience. The world tilted and dissolved around me. Every moment of the past few weeks replayed in my mind, but now viewed through this new grotesque lens. The initial argument, so perfectly timed, her sudden appearance, a comforting angel in my darkest hour, the escalating intimacy, the stolen afternoons that felt so secret, so sacred. It was all a script, a meticulously crafted performance, and I was the lead actress, the only one who didn't know she was on stage. I turned my head, a slow, mechanical motion that felt disconnected from my body. Ilara was standing beside me now, her face illuminated by the same cold blue light from the screen. She was not looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on the laptop, on the image of our two husbands sitting together in the dark. She reached out a slender hand and, with a slow, deliberate finality, closed the lid of the laptop. The click of the latch echoed in the silent studio like a cell door locking shut. Then she turned to me. There was no apology in her eyes, no shame, no fear. There was only a profound, bottomless exhaustion and the cool, assessing gaze of a collaborator evaluating a project. Her eyes drifted from my face, down my body smeared with paint, to the chaotic imprint our bodies had left on the canvas below. It was an artist's gaze, clinical and detached, appraising the composition, the use of color, the raw emotional texture of the piece. I was not her lover. I was her medium.